It's loading.
All right, so how will we know? Now, I guess?
Just click got it.
Okay.
I think so.
All right, looks like meeting is now streaming live on
Loading.
notification.
So how will we know? Now, I guess?
Just click got it.
Okay.
I think so.
All right, looks like meeting is now.
All right. That part of hell was over. Yeah, wow. So hope I sound okay. Technical difficulties and all that. Welcome to Black Collar Art House, where we provide a space for people to talk back to film, have conversations, just healthy engagement with the things we watch. So we're not merely consumers, but also participants with this visual craft. So tonight we'll be watching. Well, tonight we would have already seen the great film The Learning Tree, directed by Gordon Parks in 1969. Let's get into it. How are you guys feeling? This was a tough one. This was a tough one. Yeah, I don't know. How are you guys responding?
Yeah, I mean, a tough one is absolutely correct. Going into this, it's not usually what we put on at Black Collar, because I feel like you guys have been very careful to curate stuff that doesn't feel like torturous as far as the Black experience goes.
Yeah.
And not that this one was like, torture porn or anything like that. There certainly are movies where it kind of feels like the entire point is to show Black suffering, but this one is really very, very real with what it would be like if you were living in the 1920s in Kansas. And they don't shy away from showing, what that would be like. Yeah, but they balance it with just stuff that's normal growing up stuff,
Yeah.
The opening, just like this weird, I guess almost sexual experience in the middle of a storm. Yeah, there's a lot that's packed into this movie. Yeah, I don't even know where to start, honestly.
I think it was tough, the worst part for me, I know this might be controversial. The worst part for me was kind of like the music.
Yes.
At times. And I'm torn between thinking it was like perfect because it fit the mood, and and that's how we judge things here, right? We judge things by does it get across what it's trying to say? Like, does a film say what it's trying to say? And I think the music achieves that. But maybe this is more of a personal thing, but that whole do that joint. That joint kind of got me. I'm not gonna lie.
I'm sure you've changed since back then, but back when we were in college together, I remember you said you just could not stand the 70s as far as like that era of filmmaking. And maybe you've come around, but for me, when I was watching this I think this was late 60s, but 69 or something. Yeah.
69, yeah.
Yeah, but it definitely felt to me like, oh, this is like laying on the cheese with the soundtrack here, I personally felt like it didn't really do the movie much justice, but thankfully, like so many other elements were great that it was only the few like little transition scenes or whatever that really stood out to me.
Right.
Yeah, I felt very comfortable with it, but I also spent a decent amount of my life watching a lot of like TV shows from the 60s and 70s, like, Little House on the Prairie, Bonanza, the acting and the music wasn't as like, I guess like as like jarring for me, and it felt very familiar, very homey, I guess. So I was just like, oh, cool.
Yeah. But man, I guess like even even just wrestling with the past, I guess something that I really loved that opening. That opening was powerful. There's a lot of, at least I felt, there's a lot of Wizard of Oz in that opening, which is one of my favorite films.
It is
Um,
Kansas. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the idea of, and I guess that was, that was sort of like the first thing for me. Yeah, just like the idea of this storm uh, that swept through and sort of like changed everything. I guess like the idea that not only that the storm is normal, but that everything that precedes or the storm is like,
Mhm. Yeah, it's like a transition into, a new, like, I guess, in a way, a new world, at least for Newt, where we see a lot of right, life changes, like just with his character, with, even what happens within like the community and others, and it seems like the tornado is like the catalyst,
And I guess like, yeah, my question, or something that came to mind that I wanted to ask is, why do you guys think he chose, why do you guys think he chose, if you guys are seeing the same thing, I want to know, your response, going with the wind in this, like, why do you think that was, I don't know. Yeah, why do you think that was a good, or why do you think that was a motif that he used?
You mean like the tornado?
The tornado, yes, yeah.
It's funny. I'm actually, a few months ago, I was teaching about how a lot of African Americans around that time were going out west, and like places like Kansas, they were called the exodusters, kind of like the whole Exodus thing. Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of have this imagery of like the winds carrying this group of people out into land, and they're just trying to like settle down and find their space. And it's not easy. I think the wind kind of could tie into that feeling of being swept out and trying to find your footing, and often very violently, being shaken from your foundations. But I don't know. It's definitely very fitting of the area or the place in America that they're in.
Right.
But,
yeah.
I mean, his life changes a lot throughout the movie, and wind is a great way to show you're being kind of blown from where you were.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like the tornado is very like representative of what it means to be living out in the West and essentially like nature or the elements, or like and even I think too, and even like I guess like also a representation of like God, like everyone is subject to everybody, black and white, they're subject to essentially like the natural world, or then ultimately like, what happens like in the spiritual. But I feel like it's like, it represents kind of like how everyone has to respond to it, like we see in the beginning of the film, we see like, I think like one of the first characters we see is Jake Kiner, so he's also out looking for Newt as well, so there is a sense of like, community or neighborliness, between, this white man, and like other black people, and I think, like we kind of see, or at least the tornado helps us to kind of set the stage with that, or we get the sense of, okay, this isn't, like some of the differences here is like people have to connect and work together, to survive. And so there might be a camaraderie or neighborliness, with those relationships. But then I think at the same time, it also represents, change and it kind of becoming this like catalyst for, essentially Newt growing up. And like you mentioned earlier, one of the first things that happens is, he's taken advantage of, by big
do
people.
we have to do we have to do we have to word it down? Do we have to?
I know some people like try not to use the word, or they block out the word on YouTube. I don't know if it's a demonetization.
Taken advantage of.
I mean, I don't know what that.
Yes.
Watch the film. Watch the film.
Yeah, but yeah, we see that he's like, yeah, we see he's taken advantage of, and essentially he has it's his first sexual experience, you know, and that's something that he now like has with him or carries with him.
What's funny about that is I was watching this guy who was talking about, apparently used to play this movie all the time on HBO back in like the 80s. So it's a little fun fact. On YouTube. But this guy on YouTube was saying like when he first saw the movie as I guess a teenager or whatever, he saw that as exactly what you guys are saying, as like him being taken advantage of sexually. Then apparently when he grew up, he
whoops.
Yeah.
Though.
It was explained that she was doing it to keep him warm, to kind of save his life. And I think visually it's trying to portray that as well. Like he's shivering. It looks like he's dying of the cold. So naturally, I mean, this is like such a cliche, but like the best way to warm someone up is to take off their clothes and do skin to skin. But then it's so weird because that's, I guess logically you could say that's the reason that she does what she does, but everything about the way it's shot and his reaction to it later when he's talking with his friend, it seems like he is ashamed of it. Like it's more than just her warming him up, you know. It does seem, that's why I was saying earlier, like sexual question mark, it's very weird the way it's shot.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's like a dream sequence, you know, like the way that it's like, you know, introduced and like, and I read it because this was a book first. So I was able to get a little excerpt of it and I read, and this happens in the first chapter. So at least according to the book that he wrote, like they have sex. It's more explicit.
It is. Okay.
Yeah. So she is trying to keep him. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying it's filmed like it's a sex scene, but there's like a logical reason for why it happened where it could not be one, but it's really shot like one, and then his reaction to it later makes it seem like it was one. But then you have that clarification.
And it is true. Like I think it's both. Like it's both is true. Like she was trying to get him warm, and then essentially, you know, like essentially she ends up, you know, she starts having sex with him, you know, and then it becomes less about, you know, and I think like to your point too, the way that he responds throughout the film to it kind of reflects that something happened here, something he seems ashamed of, you know, like even though he kind of lies to his friend about it. He's like, oh, we just were, you know, under the covers, you know, to stay warm. You know, he tries not make it a big deal. There's actually another scene too, I think, that indicates even a sense or an awareness of, you know, being taken advantage of, and like, you know, this not being necessarily a positive experience for Newt. When his parents are questioning him about Arcella, they were like, he says, I wouldn't do that to her. I think there's like multiple meanings there, you know, of like, I wouldn't get her pregnant, you know, I wouldn't be disrespectful enough to like essentially like have sex with her before, you know, marrying her, and like, you know, like there's a sense of respect there. But I think underneath that too, there's a sense of like, I wouldn't do something like that to her, where there's a possible negative connotation to sex.
His view of sex has been kind of ruined by what's her name again? Big
Mabel.
Big Mabel, yeah.
Yeah,
yikes. That's a crazy way to open up a movie, you know. But it's genius because not only is there that happening, but you see setup for like all the major characters in that storm, you know. All these people are having their lives changed throughout the movie, and they're all there, you know, like the kind of, I guess, villain of the film, who he faces off with at the end. He's there too. He gets his little moment where you see him running away and you see his relationship with his father. It's great. It has everything.
Yeah. I think Marcus, I believe, is like the The antagonist. The antagonist.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
is
The antagonist is definitely a better word.
Yeah. Then yeah.
No, I went to villain because when I was watching it at some point, I had this thought like, wow, this is like the Killmonger thing, but better. You know, I was thinking of Black Panther, and I was like, this guy is he has such a reason to be violent. I mean, we'll get into this later, I'm sure. But you see it portrayed in a way that makes way more sense, I feel.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was really struck. If you talking about Marcus, I was really struck by I don't know. I was challenged by his the ending. I didn't know how I felt about that. I guess like the idea. I feel like Gordon Parks fell on. He fell on the right foot in reference to what he was trying to communicate about the larger like systemic problems in that. But I guess I struggled with the way that he gets killed. Namely in the fact that he dies in the same way as Tuck.
Right? Yeah, I think that was his name.
From the beginning of the film. And just sort of that that correlation with Criminal really bothered me. I mean, I know there's some more stuff there that that I would like to get into, but I guess I don't know. How did you guys respond to that? Like, were you guys like comfortable with that, or did that bother you as well?
It didn't make me uncomfortable. More just, it felt a little heavy-handed to me. Like, it was like, oh, okay, like it checks out. Like, I see what he's trying to say, but it was kind of just a little too neat of a ribbon to tie on that, whereas his character is so much more complex. I feel like then just like, oh, it's poetic. He died the same way this guy died. But I completely see what he's getting at there. Whereas like, this criminal who's shot by the police had this whole story and deserved much better, but was kind of cheated his entire life and then just dies like the other criminal that we saw. It's the same endpoint, and it's it ends in death. But yeah, I love his character, and I felt like maybe it could have gone for a bit more of a complex ending. It just felt a little easy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's easy. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's easy. I think he's trying to grapple with a lot. I'm sorry. I want you to respond.
Yeah, we can go ahead. I guess one after.
It's weird, man. I feel like he's grappling with a lot. I think he wants to wrestle with individual responsibility and systemic oppression, right? Like, he is the way that he is because he was made that way, right? Because his father was made that way, right? His father's abusive because he lived pre 1920s Kansas, right? That's why he's so, that's why he's so angry, because of how he's been treated, his whole life. His son is experiencing the ramifications of that, and experiencing, namely like this sort of like hopelessness, right? This sort of like nihilism, like nothing matters, which is a very real, Black experience.
It's crazy how much this movie still applies to stuff today, and even like the whole, I guess, hood movies that were really popular, like the 80s, 90s. It feels like that, but it was made, like a decade before, and about decades earlier than that. But it's just like, man, the Black experience, and the generational trauma just goes down through generations, where you have the same type of stories, the same kind of beats play out.
And we see this. I mean, yeah, we see this again, and like we see the same scene again in the woods in Juice,
Wow.
top scene. You know, I was just watching. I was like, "Yo, this is where you got. I said, yo, this is where you got it from. Like, this is good. You know, this is great, man." Just like history being connected in that way is so rich.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you were gonna.
Yeah, like I definitely felt a connection also to Boys in the Hood. And just with the duality, right? The idea of these like two characters, and like here's what happens to one character, you know, like Newt, or you know, Cuba Gooding's character. Specifically with Boys in the Hood, it's about fatherhood, you know, and like essentially here's what happens when a boy is raised, you know, but with a father, you know, in his home, or you know, whatever. And here's what happens when one isn't, you know. And then this is a little similar here, although of course it's a little different. Something I do actually really love is the centering of like motherhood in the film, how much his like mom is such a pillar, you know, in his life, and and the idea of nurture too, you know, where like Newt is like someone who is nurtured and cared for, and also, you know, like like he's nurtured, and then here's what happens with somebody who isn't nurtured. Because then we see that too. We see her, you know, trying to, you know, I guess trying to resolve, you know, an outcome for Marcus when she goes to the judge and says, you know, maybe not send him to the reformatory. Maybe we could all do something for him instead, because he doesn't have, you know, a mom, and like, you know, he has to deal with a lot with his dad, you know, and then the judge is like, nah, like somebody has to go to jail, you know.
Somebody has to pay.
Somebody has to pay. Which I also like, I don't know how like conscious this what necessarily was for Gordon Parks, but I love also this kind of like calling to the ways that we, you know, depend so heavily on punitive systems as opposed to reformation, you know, where it's like the answer for Marcus isn't go to jail. We clearly see that he goes and he's just abused even more, and he comes out even more, you know, hardened by this, you know, but the solution is, you know, essentially like care, focus, you know, community, and love, you know.
And so, and speaking on love, you know, I do think, well, I guess sort of like in contrast to love, I do think it's how did you guys, well, I do think it's interesting the way power systems are treated in this work. People in power, you know, especially the powerful ones, there seems to be a sort of apathy isn't the right word, but sort of passivity amongst them. Where like these are people that know the right answers, but then refuse to act. Probably because the system is so powerful. But they refuse to act nonetheless. You know, that I think what stood out to me was you know, two times the scene the scene in the prison, right, where he's praying over Marcus, and he's saying, you know, he's telling him about Jesus.
The pastor.
The pastor is telling him about, you know, about Jesus, and you know, and praying, you know, for his soul, and praying that essentially, I mean, if I'm remembering this correctly, that he'll be complicit. Complicit and transformed. Which is like, I didn't have anything for that, but really, really interesting. I guess perspective there. And then he doesn't actually do anything when he's made aware of how evil the system is. And he probably already knows, but he doesn't respond. So I guess like, and then of course there's the situation with the teacher as well, but you know, but the situation with the pastor stood out to me more because pastors are supposed to be safe spaces, because pastors are supposed to be you know, agents of a good God. So
I feel like
how do you respond to that?
Yeah, it supports your point a lot more. I I don't think that that's common or that's consistent throughout the film. I think that more what I see is that there are systems where it seems hopeless, but the director is showing that there are good people who are at least aware of things and are trying to make a difference. Because,
and I agree with that. I do agree with that. But yeah, well, we could continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Because I don't think that the principal was really being passive. As soon as he realized what was actually going on, he was immediately like, okay, she is acting racist, and I'm sorry that happened to you. And he basically has the entire point of the film, or the thesis, I guess, summarized with his monologue about generations, causing what you're experiencing now. His whole thing about, I can't remember exactly, but like grandfathers and the old principal taught her to act this way, which is why she's acting this way, and he's saying, well, we're going to have a meeting and it will not be this way, if I have anything to say about it moving in the future. And the judge, he is a bit more passive because, as you said earlier, he had the scene where the mom tries to convince him to do the right thing, and he doesn't, but at the end, it's the same guy, right?
Yeah, same guy.
Yeah. At the end, he has the thing where it's like, you guys should all be ashamed of yourselves because you guys are what caused this man to kill himself, or you guys are what caused our main character to not want to come forward with the truth, So I feel like less passivity and more like people are trying to do the right thing despite how the system is constantly knocking them back down, but it's rare. I like that there are those scenes though, because otherwise it would have just been a really depressing movie, because there's so many there's so much just like morbidity and like terrible things, like the carnival scene. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
The time period. So the director is also saying, but there were people who were paving the way for a better future, in small ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things that makes the film like so interesting is like the nuance, that's present. And wrestling, I think, with a lot of what it may mean or what it means. And then I think too the relevance. I think that's what I love about how this is still relevant. Because I think one of my favorite parts in the scene with the principal is at the end of it, he tells him she deserves your respect. And I like how Newt kind of looks at him at the end of it, and he and we're supposed to be, and it's kind of like, is that what Newt needs to like walk away with in that moment? I know like this is bad. I know that I have no control. I didn't have any control over this because this is the previous principal's perspectives and things like that. But at the end of the day, you need to respect her. But this is also the teacher that's essentially discouraging not only him, like, because we see that we also see, I think, some awareness too of like the opportunities that Newt has, where Newt fights for, he pushes against, anyone telling him, or at least the teacher telling him that he can't do this or he should just focus on getting a job. And I can't imagine, I think we're supposed to think in that scene too, like there are other students who may be just like him, having aspirations and like wanting to go to college, but how much more are they, kind of believing what the teacher says when she says, you can't do it. It's better for you to just get a job, and then they walk away from pursuing anything. So it's like, I think I like the way that, the fact that that's something that we're left with too, because I think it forces us to weigh, like, this principal is right, and his heart is in like the right place.
Yeah, he's an ally.
Yeah,
he is an ally.
Yeah. And then it's like, but what is how can we be sure of, essentially the outcome of what he says he's going to do, especially when this seems to be so rampant and he's just finding this out, that all of the Black students are being told this, how much of an ally,
I do think that there are some complexities to allyship that we have yet to come across.
Realistically speaking, Nora's completely correct. Like if this actually happened in real life, like yeah, you would have to kind of question that a little bit. But I feel like in the context of the scene, though, it was more just like, but I'm still the principal, so we can't have people just disrespecting teachers.
Yeah.
You're right, though. It was an interesting note to end on. I kind of just saw it more as just like, all right, but I technically told you off for it, wink, wink, and he was kind of just like, yeah, all right,
Yeah.
Say yes. He kind of just looks back and then leaves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like I think the pastor. Oh yeah, coming back to like the pastor, I think was also a beautiful, like, well, not beautiful, but I really liked, kind of like stepping and tapping into, a time where, or a particular, space where like the complicity is what's most important for Black people. Like we know that he's probably aware of the conditions, that Marcus is in the jail, and then he tells him explicitly, like, yo, like the minute you walk out of here, this dude's gonna be like beating me up and all this stuff, and then but he's also feeling the weight of how much, how little power, or like what little power he does have, where it's like even if he leverages it or even tries to push, there's going to be consequences. And I think we benefit off of the history of those who did and suffered certain consequences, or a lot of consequences. We get to see their bravery. But I think what this film does is point to, but here's also here was the other option that people had to deal with, where the only solace they had really was essentially hope in the afterlife, where it's like, oh, that's where we'll be free, we'll have peace, we'll have, security and safety when we die, if we give our life to Jesus. But then it's like, we see the way that this isn't present with people's like heart, people's pain. And I think in another way too, that like, here's another way that Marcus is being failed by his community. Where like there's so many things, I guess. I think it points to, there's so many things in our communities that we say hold us up, like faith communities, schools, other adults. But then we see like, oh, maybe like, especially with Newt, like it's really because of his family. It's his family's values, the fact that his family has a semblance of wealth, and that they have the ranch, they're not in need of any money. His mom is the maid to the judge of the town, so she's making some kind of bank doing that, but like
bank 20's bank $1.50.
I mean, 20 African-American 20 bank, but
it's two different worlds. $1. Yeah. You get $1 this week.
Yeah, but Newt looks relatively, he's decent. So does his family. His sister does. They're, the ranch looks good. They're not,
Yeah,
they're not. We see it compared to like Marcus, where literally there's like, it looks like a lot of junk just out in the front of their house, But anyway, but we do see, I think the film kind of points to like, there's so many things that kind of like help in, even for where Newt is, where it's not just Newt's, inherent goodness that allows him to be, essentially the one who like lives in the end and kind of is able to go off and live we can assume a good life. It's really,
the one who makes it out.
Another thing that we see, but like, it's other things. It's, his family, what his family has access to. It's, how much of his family, right? Marcus has one father, Newt has his dad, his mom, his uncle,
and multi-generational, generational home.
I think like these things kind of point to how like, I think the film kind of points to not necessarily like individual goodness or morality, is what allows you to, make it out or, have upward mobility, but really all these other elements, all the other ways that you either respond to the system or, have some sort of education or some sort of, access to, consistent, wealth or income or some sort of thing. Yeah, but speaking of wealth, like I'd love to bring up Arcella's character. I think she's also a very interesting commentary on, I would say like the Black bourgeoisie of the time. What do you guys, I guess broadly, like what do you guys think of Arcella's character and essentially what happens to her story?
Yeah, I was reading online, before we started this call, just kind of catch up with some of the details. And in the summary, I think on Wikipedia, it straight up says that she was, taken advantage of, we're using that phrase again, and I actually didn't even get that while I was watching. I feel like that went over my head. For me, I saw her hop into the car and then she was clearly very disturbed after
the
event. Which I should have connected the dots right there now that I think about it. But I kind of just assumed that he wasn't who he turned out to be. But there definitely was that like attraction for her, which is so funny because the scene before, it's like you would think she wouldn't want anything to do with him after that weird scene in the restaurant where it's like it's shown that if you try to have nice things with white people, like you're kind of punished for it. The waiter is just saying like, get out, he's not having any of it.
Not that phased her though.
Yeah.
No, she was
I guess it didn't phase her, right? I mean,
she was in it to win it.
Yeah, it clearly phased the main character. And I thought they were on the same page, but I guess she kind of wanted a bit more of that. Like that's what got her in the car. And then I mean, how do you guys react to like her character turn? Because by the end she kind of just drops out of the story because I mean the family's ashamed or she's ashamed and they move out.
Man, it's weird. I don't what struck me initially about her character was sort of like when she was introduced. I feel like there's a lot of Judeo-Christian text in this work. I do think that there is significance in the fact that she gets that she's seen right after he's taken advantage of. I don't necessarily agree with this, sort of like artistically, but I do think something is happening here. Because he gets taken advantage of, at the beginning of the film, and then they do this beautiful shot of like closing in on like the praying hands when he gets home. And then he's in church, and then he looks up and sees, in my estimation, I do want to know you guys respond to this but in my estimation, he sees Eve. I think that's why it's like dreamy, or this is him, his sexuality sort of like awakening, right? He's seeing the world and sort of in a new way.
I mean,
I do struggle. If I'm right about that, I do have deep issues with that. And there's stuff there maybe about Gordon Parks' personal perspective. I don't know.
I mean, now that you bring that up, I totally see it. Like she's tempted with the nice car and everything, and then she's like, that's her sin. And then she's punished for it, which I can see how that's very problematic.
If it's
a perfect couple, huh?
Well, if it goes further back, then the sin would have to be elsewhere.
Yeah,
it would have to. There may be a conversation. Don't quote me on this, please. Nobody. There may be a conversation about Black bourgeoisie. It's possible, but I mean, I'm not committed to that, but I don't think it was necessarily. I don't think it was necessarily consequence. What happened to her. Although, I mean, I'm struggling because there are white supremacy conversations in her perspective, right? The fact that what the Black bourgeoisie values. There are issues. Yeah, there are issues there with her vision, right? The fact that all mans have to do. I mean, she valued. It's clear that she valued whiteness. She sits down and she's just like, she's just in. Like she's with her man. And anyway, but she's in.
But
it's frustrating. Sorry, real quickly. It's frustrating how quickly she switches it up and like how fast those things happen in the concept of the movie. Maybe if it was given more space, to develop naturally. But I feel like as far as her character and her socioeconomic status, that does kind of check out, like you were saying, like what do the Black bourgeoisie value,
yeah, I would say for at least go ahead.
Go for it.
No, continue. I thought you.
I can see that.
Okay. Yeah, I think at least for the Adam and Eve correlation, I think that begins and ends in the church. Like that's like where it is, because it would be more so about, Newt's awakening, of like coming into this next stage of his life where he sees, essentially he's able to see, right, like girls or women, which I would also say makes a lot of sense, because for a very long time, a lot of Christians believed, because of Milton's, Milton, who wrote Paradise Lost, sex happened after the fall. So sex is seen as something that is inherently sinful, or attraction to, the opposite sex is something that's it's sinful or, only for procreation, not for enjoyment. So it kind of makes sense, I think, for his relationship with Arcella to sort of like begin after that. But I think also a huge like marker of it is how sweet and innocent it is. Where like Newt is he wants to spend time with her, and he like buys her even after everything that happens.
The garden scene.
Yeah,
there's the garden scene as well. But yeah, that's yeah. But I think that's just beauty. Okay. Yeah, beauty, safety. When he takes her into the little like area, and they're like, they're gonna hang out there later or something. And then you have the whole montage where it's like all the different seasons, they're spending time together, and it's really sweet. But I feel like at least for her character, the consequence that she ends up, having to deal with is ultimately, I think, just like other characters, like with Marcus, we see there's something else here. It's not necessarily just her morality, it's, something else that has taught her to value whiteness in this way. We see Newt doesn't, he's not Marcus in that he hates white people. He has a white friend, the problem 40.
The actor for his friend.
That was great. He was like Maggie Young in the other room. I was like, what is going on here? Yeah. But like he has his friend, He also knows, because Chauncey's the name of the white guy that
I was just saying Chauncey, what a great name.
I was like, really? And you see the scene where, Newt's mom, sees him in bed with a girl, and she's like, what are you doing? She's fussing at him. So we also know he's like, he's a ill repute, I guess is the way to say it. But so there's some stuff happening when he sees Chauncey pull up, where he's like, okay, this guy's kind of sus. And then getting in a car with a white person, right? Obviously, Chauncey has never offered Newt a ride before. That's just weird. Especially for that time, that's very, very like, red flag. What's happening here? And the fact that Arcella is like, yeah, let's go. There's a huge indication of her value system where she's like, oh, totally. Like one, right? I think it's a nice car. She recognizes that, and two, like it's the idea of, oh, like I can take maybe not even taking a risk. Like, oh, this guy, this white guy offering us a ride in his car, that's cool. She willfully walks into the pharmacy, where they're having the milkshakes and stuff. Yeah. She's very comfortable sitting there, despite we see other people are looking, the guy coming in and then him being like, get out ultimately. But she's very comfortable in that situation. And she knows, dude is checking her out, Chauncey's checking her out and she's taking it in,
And she's checking him out.
Yeah, and she's checking him out.
Yeah.
And so we see there too, it's even a little less of like, oh, Arcella's character, she just, whatever. It's also this idea of like Chauncey being emblematic of like whiteness, something to pursue, something you want to be around, something that is, oh, this is good for me. And I think there's so many things that she does as a young Black girl that, in that time she would have been warned about. You don't get in a car with, and he's obviously older too, right? You don't get in a car with an older, white guy. You don't, you be very careful with that because anything can happen to you. And we see something does, when he comes again, and it's clear it's not when she walks away from it, because she could have been like, what to do, after what happened, and then be like, oh snap, Newt, and maybe she could have been more cold and distant, but we see she looks very forlorn after that experience. So we know that it was something probably, she didn't want or wasn't expecting. She might have been expecting to be treated equally or fairly, or even like, a potential girlfriend. But instead, he probably brought her to the bed, like every other, woman he seems to, or the other woman we see him with, and maybe even more so for her because she's Black. But I think she's representative of, what happens when, whiteness, because we see these juxtapositions. For her, it's whiteness as like, this is something to pursue, something that's good, something we should align ourselves with, compared to Marcus, who was like, whiteness is something that is always hated, always,
always evil.
And then Newt, which is in the middle and like basically
people.
Yeah, you judge people as you see them.
Yeah. And there's a higher, and there's a higher sort of like relationship to these things, like good and evil, and what have you.
But I definitely think that was like, like an interesting, like sort of like pointing to a commentary, especially in the way that they fled town too, right? Like it was also like really interesting. I think, because I think they could have stayed. Like the community, I would argue, would understand what had happened to Arcella, because it's not, abnormal for things like that to happen, to Black women,
my thing is, I guess like especially with what we find out later, finding out that she would have been, or like that the family would have been safe. I think that does beg the question. Why did they flee? I mean, we know why they fled, but it's like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, granted, we don't know whether or not the judge would have, how the judge would have responded. And it is telling that he says that he apologizes to random Black people.
Because they weren't even part of the family.
They weren't even part of it. He said, I'm so sorry. I'm like, bruh, like, it wasn't. I just represent
kind of realistic writing in this movie. Like a lot of realistic writing, because I could totally see
right.
I think the reason they fled, or at least how I saw it, was part of just traditional conservative Christian belief. Like I imagine they felt immense shame in the family because of this act, having sex outside of marriage, getting pregnant. But also, yeah, just the time period too, where it's like, what's going to happen to that baby, or like how is the public going to react? How is the white public going to react to this? Like, are they in danger because of it? Yeah, just I get why they wouldn't want to stay.
Yeah.
But I definitely, from what I saw of the parents, especially the father, there's probably like a lot of shame there as like a Christian family who like goes to church and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, shame. I think a lot of like pride, you know. Yeah, I think something else too. I had noticed is the fact that their home is in town. You know, like it's not like everybody else who lives like, you know, essentially like outside of town. Everybody kind of like, you know, yeah, like they're right, like you could walk from the school to her house, you know. So like there's also that sort of presence or like connection or closeness because you see other white people live in the town too. So I think even there's that of like, you know, their positioning where they wanted to be positioned, and it's like, you know, to have her have a baby, and then, you know, the potential for people to know that it was, you know, this white man who had impregnated her. You know, like a lot of shame and a lot of like, you know, also like pride because they didn't even tell anybody they're leaving. You know, like he comes to bring her birthday present and the house is cleared out. You know,
that was crazy.
Like. Yeah, you know, and I think that was interesting. Like, I guess even just that feeling of like fleeing, you know, as opposed to like even like, yeah, we're gonna leave. You know, we're gonna talk to, you know, the families or whatever. Or at least Newt's family, right? After the accusation, you know, against him, there could have been a conversation after from them that was like, you know, hey, like you're gonna leave town, you know, blah blah blah, you know. Yeah, they kind of just leave, and I think that the amount of shame that they held there, I think, was like, yeah, just so interesting and like and representative of like, yeah, just I guess like their value system. Yeah. You know?
And I want to before we end, I want to touch on two things. I loved something that surprised me about the film was how they dealt with tension and joy. I love the way that, I love the way they just show Black people being happy.
Yeah.
I love that. You know, I love.
Sorry.
No,
in the midst of like just terrible events, like even when they are literally being paid to like fight each other.
Right.
For the pleasure of a crowd, you know, they're like planning how they're going to scam this guy and break up the money. You know, like they're still kids,
right,
making the best out of just like this horrific situation.
I
guess it's horrific for us, you know, with time. They probably didn't even think of it that way, but there's joy despite some of these circumstances, which is great.
Yeah, and even the way they treat the Black bodies treated, the nudity scene really surprised me. Yeah, you know, like when they get naked and start like you know playing in the water, you know, it was just such a joyous scene. It was just so well done.
Mm-hmm.
And then from a scene of like tension where like him and Marcus was like, he's like Marcus basically threatens Newt. And then they go and like spend time at the. So bad. I live in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I almost said watering hole.
Watering hole. I think that's fine because even like this, it's very small. It's not a lake. It's not a it's not a pool. Water hole. It makes sense.
I just don't want to disrespect it's Midwesterners, you know. But yeah, you know, so they start jumping in the water, and you know, and of course we know this, like, you know, that whole scene was inspired by, you know, Gordon Parks' photography on his book. You know, and we have intentionally stayed away from Gordon Parks as photographer because we feel that it's a rare space for him to be talked about as director and for him to be wrestled with, you know, as far as like these things. So we kind of stayed our hand on that. but I really love the way, you know, joy was depicted in this film. Um, yeah, especially like in contrast to, you know, to tension. Yeah.
I think a lot of like, you know, this. I think I love this movie for like the Black boyhood that is in it. You know, like it's something that we and the gentleness, just the gentleness. You know,
which is something we're always looking for when we watch. You know, when we watch, you know, work intended for young adults.
Yes. Yeah. Like gentleness and like, you know, how the characters are handled, the ways that, you know, like their perspectives are shown and what they value, what they focus on, you know, like, I feel like Newt was handled with such care. And the fact that he had such a close relationship to his mother, you know, was one that wasn't, you know, like, it wasn't like, it's time to be a man, you know? Or even like were many stories of like, you know, becoming a boy into a man is kind of about like this idea of you detach from the mother and then are led by the father. His dad is his dad is present. He's there. He's not absent, but he doesn't play a big role in the story as much as his mother does. And I really love that. I love the scene where he lays on the floor next to her casket, you know, and he's like, and he tells, and before that he says, I'm not afraid of death anymore, you know. Like I feel like her presence was so powerful. There's actually a really sweet story about the actress and how she got the role. And basically, like, she had read the book and she wrote a letter to Gordon Parks saying, if you ever do a movie, I want to play the mom, like I want to play her, right? He forgot about the letter. He happened to go to New York and he happened to see her in a play and he saw her and he's like, that's her. That's my mom. I want her to play my mom. And so he comes to her backstage and she's like, oh my gosh, at last you came, you read my letter. And he was like, I don't remember your letter, but you are totally like my mom. And he said it was always very strange to see her on set acting because her mannerisms, how she talked was like just like his mom. Which I was like, oh my God, that's sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a lot of valuing of like boyhood.
Yeah, no, she is amazing in that, and you're right. She's very strong, you know, as a character, and just like with her beliefs too. Because earlier we were saying, you know, people see heaven as something to look forward to, but in her speech to her son, she's not even saying that. She's saying like, who knows what's out there, you know, but she believes that we're supposed to do the best and make the best of what we have here. Like that's what we should focus on. So
the learning tree.
I see that as like a strength that, you know, instead of just looking forward, she's like, let's focus on now.
And the idea of like, the idea of like good and evil like coexisting. You know, I forgot how it goes, but we'll put it up in post. But yeah, before we end, last thing, we started watching. Because this film was so impactful, we decided to go ahead and check out Gordon Parks' next film, which was Shaft. And it was interesting to see, a sort of like, to see him transition from like a sort of like coming of age story where like he's wrestling with things like, you know, like helplessness and agency and love and pain, to transition to a work that's far more abrasive, I think. Maybe
it's a pretty big transition.
Yeah.
I haven't even seen Shaft, but from what I know and the cultural, you know, the cultural memory of it, I can't even believe that's the same director. I mean,
it's crazy. And it's like, but you see, like watching, we only watched it, we watched like half the movie, but we were just doing other stuff. But like, you see a lot of the learning tree in that. And like, you see kind of like why he may have wanted to make this film after the learning tree. Because you see things like, you know, Shaft is, he's a cop.
He's a private detective.
He's a detective cop. And
very similar.
You know, but he sort of like operates like outside of the law and does sort of like, you know, what the law can't do.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, which is why I point out he's a private detective. He's not in the system at all.
Yes,
Yeah.
But he's also working very closely with the system. Towards the ends of black and brown people or the oppressed in general. And it's interesting. It's interesting to go from like this boy walking down these dusty roads to have him then go to New York City, a private detective in New York City, smooth talking, smooth action hero, basically.
Yeah.
From that, I do think it's interesting that was chosen after the Learning Tree.
Yeah, and I think it might point a little bit to Roy Park's own life, because after his mother died, he was like one of like 15 children. He was sent to live with family in Missouri, and then I think at 15 he gets kicked out the house, and he had to like work in a whorehouse. So we see some of that in Learning Tree. But essentially he's had to kind of like go on his own, like starting from being a teenager, and we see how much he's accomplished. And I think Shaft kind of represents, possibly his manhood, right? Shaft is one who he's very emblematic too of a lot of the trickster figure. I feel
interesting
in African American and African lore, like the way he talks to the cops, the way he avoids giving too much information, or he's able to kind of see or suss out like you're trying to use me or whatever. He's this he's able to survive the streets. Like I love one of the first shots we see, he's literally walking into traffic, not stopping, and he's just
doing it.
Yeah.
He just going for it.
Yeah.
Play by the rules.
And cars are stopping, yo.
We should have like a part 2 episode where we just talk about Shaft.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, we really should. But it's very interesting. It's very interesting to see, you had Newt and then Shaft and
because I feel they're the same person.
Yes.
I feel they're the same person.
Yeah.
But just at different times, in their life. And I guess I've never, you mentioned earlier, my history of the 70s. I don't know. I've never cared for Shaft as a film. It's been, but I know it's been considered great work, and just like watching The Learning Tree and then being encouraged to go and watch Shaft. And I'm just like, oh, this film is really good. This film is really good.
Not bad, actually.
It's not bad, but it's but it's saying a lot, it's saying a lot.
I think they both have this incredible sense of self. I think that's what, something that Newt and Shaft share. And maneuvering, being able to learn.
Oh, the ending of The Learning Tree, right? What he learned from the story, right? And how he's able to talk back. He's able to talk back to Kirky. He's able to talk back to Kirky and walk on his own path. I don't know. I do think that boy goes on to become Shaft.
The cinematic universe.
Park's cinematic universe. Yeah, I see it.
We'll definitely watch Shaft after this, but yes.
Yeah.
You're
gonna. Thank you guys for joining us for this very late Black Collar Art House presentation of Shaft, of A Learning Tree, The Learning Tree. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you join us next month, where we'll be watching a film for Women's History Month. It's gonna be a good one, and we hope you enjoyed this next one, and we hope you enjoyed this one. And I apologize for all of my fumbles.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
We are learning. But yes, we will see you guys next time. And
good night.
enjoy your night or morning.